The transport ships descended through Valdris Prime's crimson atmosphere like falling stars, their hulls scarred and patched from countless campaigns. I watched from the observation deck of Command Station Omega-7, my 4 eyes tracking their clumsy approach with the practiced gaze of a military observer who had witnessed 1,000 such arrivals. These weren't the sleek vessels of the Galactic Coalition's elite forces, nor the imposing dreadnoughts of the hegemony war machine. These were mercenary ships, hired out of desperation when our conventional forces had failed 3 consecutive times to break the enemy's stranglehold on this strategic world. Humans, spat Commander Velosh, his serpentine form coiled in obvious disgust beside me. The Coalition Council must be truly desperate to hire these primitives. I had to agree. After 40 cycles serving as a military analyst for the Cathurian Defense Corps, I had studied every major species in our galaxy. The humans were relative newcomers to interstellar warfare, having achieved faster-than-light travel barely 2 centuries ago. Their homeworld was a death trap by most species' standards, crushing gravity, violent weather, deadly fauna, and atmospheric composition that would kill most sentient beings within minutes. Yet somehow, these creatures had not only survived, but thrived in such hostile conditions. The first transport touched down on landing pad Delta with more grace than I had expected. Steam hissed from its landing thrusters as the massive cargo doors began to open. What emerged made several observers step back instinctively. The humans were larger than their files had indicated, each one standing nearly 2 meters tall and moving with a predatory fluidity that set every evolutionary alarm in my brain screaming. Their faces were hidden behind full environmental suits, but their movements spoke of barely contained violence and purpose. "Look at them," whispered Subcommander Krita, her delicate Zephyrian features twisted in fascination and horror. "They move like apex predators." She was right. Every step the humans took was calculated, their heads constantly turning to scan for threats. Even in what should have been a safe landing zone, they moved as if expecting ambush at any moment. Their equipment was crude by galactic standards, projectile weapons that seemed almost primitive compared to our energy-based armaments, armor that looked heavy and cumbersome, and vehicles that appeared to be built for function rather than elegance. The human commander removed his helmet as he approached our delegation, revealing features that were both alien and disturbingly familiar. His skin was weathered and scarred, his eyes a pale blue that seemed to pierce straight through you. When he spoke, his voice carried an accent I couldn't place, though the universal translator rendered his words perfectly clear. "Colonel Marcus Chen, 82nd Independent Regiment," he announced, extending a hand toward General Thexam. The gesture was curious. Humans insisted on this physical contact as a greeting, something most species found either amusing or mildly disturbing. "We understand you have a problem that needs solving." General Thexam, a veteran Valorian whose purple carapace bore the scars of a dozen campaigns, regarded the human with barely concealed skepticism. "Commander Chen, your reputation precedes you, though I must admit some of the reports seem exaggerated." The human's mouth curved in what I had learned was called a smile, though on Predator features it looked more like a threat display. "Which reports would those be, General?" "The incident at Kepler Station, the defense of New Geneva, the creative solution to the asteroid belt pirates." Thexam's secondary arms gestured dismissively. "Surely these accounts have been embellished in the telling." "I was there for all 3, Chen replied simply. "What exactly do you need us to do here?" The briefing that followed was standard military procedure, but I found myself studying the humans rather than the tactical displays. They listened with an intensity that was almost unsettling, asking questions that revealed tactical thinking far more sophisticated than their primitive appearance suggested. While other mercenary groups might ask about payment schedules or casualty compensation, the humans focused on terrain analysis, enemy movement patterns, and civilian evacuation routes. "The Thrakari have held the northern continent for 6 months, General Thexam explained, gesturing to the holographic battlefield display. 3 separate assault forces have failed to break their defensive perimeter. They've dug in along the Valdris mountain range, using the natural barriers to funnel our forces into killing fields. Traditional tactics have proven insufficient." "What's their estimated strength?" asked a human female, her voice carrying the same dangerous calm as her commander. "Approximately 40,000 ground troops, supported by orbital bombardment platforms and atmospheric superiority fighters." One of the humans, a massive specimen whose armor bore sergeant stripes, actually laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. 40,000, that's all. Hell, sir, we've taken on worse odds than that for breakfast. I exchanged glances with Commander Velosh. Either these humans were supremely confident or completely insane. The Thrakari were renowned as some of the galaxy's most effective warriors, their chitinous exoskeletons naturally armored, and their tactical doctrine refined over millennia of conquest. They had held this position against 3 separate coalition assaults, each one larger and better equipped than these human mercenaries. "What's our time frame?" Chen asked. "The Thrakari are preparing to advance on the southern cities within the next 10 standard days. If we cannot break their hold on the northern continent by then, we will be forced to evacuate 17 million civilians." The general's voice carried the weight of impending defeat. "Every conventional approach has failed. The mountain passes are too narrow for large-scale assault, their anti-aircraft coverage prevents aerial insertion, and their defensive positions are virtually impregnable." The human commander nodded slowly, his pale eyes studying the tactical display with disturbing intensity. "General, with respect, you've been thinking about this all wrong. You're trying to fight the Thrakari the way they want to be fought, direct confrontation against prepared positions. That's not how humans solve problems." "Then how do you propose to succeed where 3 armies have failed?" That predator's smile returned. "We're going to do what humans do best, General. We're going to cheat." The meeting concluded with deployment schedules and supply requisitions, but I remained troubled by something I couldn't quite identify. The humans had listened to our briefing with the attention of professionals, had asked intelligent questions, and had demonstrated a grasp of tactical realities that surpassed my expectations. Yet there was something else, an undercurrent of confidence that seemed almost reckless given the odds they faced. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Colonel Chen paused beside our observation group. "You gentlemen will be observing our operations, I assume." "Standard procedure," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "All mercenary units are subject to coalition oversight." "Good," his blue eyes locked onto mine with unsettling directness. "You might learn something useful." That night, as I prepared my initial reports, I found myself struggling to categorize what I had witnessed. The humans appeared to be everything the intelligence files suggested: primitive, violent, and dangerously unpredictable. Yet there had been moments during the briefing when I glimpsed something else entirely. When they studied the tactical displays, when they asked their probing questions, when they smiled those predatory smiles, I had seen the shadow of something that made my evolutionary instincts scream warnings. Commander Velosh visited my quarters as I worked, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of uncertainty. "The humans concern me," he admitted, coiling his serpentine lower body in a gesture of agitation. "There is something about them that feels wrong." "Wrong how?" "They look at this impossible situation and see opportunity rather than defeat. They study a defensive position that is held against overwhelming force and speak of victory as if it were inevitable." He gestured with his upper arms, a sign of deep disturbance among his species. "What kind of species develops such confidence in the face of certain death?" I had been wondering the same thing. Most intelligent species evolved from prey animals, developing complex social structures and advanced technology to compensate for physical vulnerabilities. A few, like the Thrakari, descended from pack hunters and retained their predatory instincts alongside their intelligence. But humans seemed to be something else entirely. Persistence hunters who had climbed to the top of their world's food chain not through strength or speed, but through sheer bloody-minded refusal to give up. The next morning brought our first real glimpse of human military capabilities in action. Rather than establishing a traditional forward base, the 82nd Independent Regiment seemed to simply vanish into the Valdris landscape. Their heavy equipment was camouflaged so effectively that even our advanced sensors had difficulty tracking their positions. Their troops moved through terrain that should have been impassable for bipedal creatures, using natural cover with an instinctive skill that suggested generations of predator-prey evolution. "Where are they?" demanded General Thexam during the morning briefing. "Our satellites show their initial deployment then. Nothing. It's as if 8,000 soldiers simply disappeared." The answer came 12 hours later when Thrakari forward patrols began reporting impossible sightings, enemies appearing from empty ground. Supply convoys ambushed by attackers who melted back into the landscape, before reinforcements could arrive. Communications arrays sabotaged by invisible infiltrators who left no trace of their passage. Ghost tactics, observed Commander Velosh, studying the reports with grudging respect. They're using the terrain itself as a weapon. I found myself reviewing everything I knew about human military history, trying to understand what we were witnessing. Their homeworld's hostile environment had shaped not just their physiology, but their entire approach to conflict. Where other species might retreat when faced with superior force, humans seemed incapable of recognizing defeat. They adapted, improvised, and found ways to turn disadvantages into advantages with a creativity that bordered on madness. The first major engagement came on the fourth day of human deployment. A Thrakari reconnaissance force of 500 warriors, supported by heavy armor and air cover, moved to investigate the disappearance of several outposts. The humans allowed them to penetrate deep into the foothills before springing their trap. What followed defied every principle of conventional warfare. Instead of meeting the Thrakari head-on, the humans used the mountainous terrain to fragment the enemy force. Avalanches triggered by precisely placed explosives separated armor from infantry. Communications jamming left isolated units unable to coordinate. And then the humans themselves emerged from positions that should have been impossible to reach, moving through the chaos like demons given form. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the entire Thrakari force had been eliminated with minimal human casualties. But the true impact wasn't the tactical victory, it was the psychological effect on both sides. The coalition forces that witnessed the engagement spoke in whispers of human capabilities that seemed almost supernatural. The Thrakari, for the first time in their proud military history, began to report that their enemies were something beyond normal understanding. That evening, as I compiled my observations for transmission to Cathurian Command, I realized that everything I thought I knew about warfare was about to change. The humans weren't just another mercenary force. They were something new and terrifying, and they had only just begun to show us what they were capable of. Colonel Chen's words echoed in my mind as I sealed my report. You might learn something useful. I was beginning to suspect that useful might be the most frightening education I would ever receive. The screaming started at dawn on the 5th day. I was reviewing overnight intelligence reports when the emergency klaxons began wailing across Command Station Omega-7. Through my observation windows, I could see smoke rising from the northern foothills where the Thrakari had established their forward defensive line. The communications array crackled with panicked voices speaking in the harsh, clicking language of the enemy, voices that carried something I had never heard from Thrakari warriors before. Fear? What's happening out there? Demanded General Thexam as he burst into the intelligence center, his purple carapace gleaming with the stress sweat his species produced under pressure. Lieutenant Keksai, our communications specialist, worked frantically at her console. The Thrakari emergency frequencies are chaos, sir. Multiple units reporting. Impossible contacts. They're calling for immediate reinforcement and orbital support. Show me the tactical display, I ordered, my training overriding my growing sense of unease. The holographic battlefield materialized before us, red markers indicating Thrakari positions and blue showing the last known locations of human forces. But something was wrong with the display. The human markers were scattered across impossible locations, behind enemy lines, in areas our intelligence had marked as impassable, and in some cases overlapping with Thrakari positions that should have been secure. The display must be malfunctioning, muttered Commander Velosh. Those positions are impossible. That's when Colonel Chen's voice cut through the chaos on the command frequency, speaking with the same calm tone he might use to order breakfast. Command, this is Ghost 6. Package delivery complete on targets Alpha through Delta, moving to secondary objectives. Ghost 6, clarify your status, General Thexam responded. Our sensors show you in multiple impossible positions. The human's laugh carried clearly through the speakers. Impossible is just another word for something nobody's tried yet, General. We're exactly where we need to be. Through the observation windows, I watched something that defied rational explanation. Thrakari defensive positions that had withstood months of bombardment were erupting in secondary explosions. Not the external assault I had expected, but internal detonations that suggested the humans had somehow penetrated supposedly impregnable fortifications. The mountain passes that the enemy used to funnel our forces into kill zones were now working against them, trapping scattered Thrakari units in valleys where human hunter-killer teams could pick them apart at will. How, whispered Subcommander Krita, her delicate features pale with shock. How did they get inside those positions? The answer came when our long-range cameras finally managed to capture clear footage of human operations. What I saw challenged everything I understood about physics, tactics, and the limitations of biological intelligence. The humans were climbing vertical rock faces that our equipment rated as impossible to ascend. They were moving through underground cave systems that our geological surveys had dismissed as inaccessible. They were using natural camouflage so effective that they literally disappeared against backgrounds where concealment should have been impossible. Persistence hunters, I murmured, the pieces finally beginning to fall into place. What? General Thexam turned to me, his compound eyes reflecting confusion. It's their evolutionary heritage, I explained, my voice growing stronger as understanding dawned. Most predators rely on speed or strength for quick kills, but humans evolved as persistence hunters. They would chase prey across vast distances, following tracks for days or weeks until their target collapsed from exhaustion. They never gave up, never stopped, never allowed their prey a moment's rest. On the tactical display, the pattern was becoming clear. The humans weren't fighting a conventional battle. They were hunting. Each Thrakari position was being stalked, surrounded, and eliminated with methodical precision. The enemy's numerical superiority meant nothing when human teams could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and disappear before reinforcements arrived. The first major Thrakari stronghold fell before noon. Fort Zirian had been built into the side of Mount Valdris itself, its defensive positions carved from living rock and protected by overlapping fields of fire that made direct assault suicide. 3 coalition armies had broken themselves against those walls. The Thrakari had boasted that it was impregnable, a fortress that could hold until the end of time. The humans took it in 47 minutes. They didn't assault the walls or attempt to breach the main gates. Instead, they used something the Thrakari hadn't considered, the mountain's own cave systems. While the enemy had fortified every obvious approach, they had ignored the natural passages that honeycomb Valdris Prime's geology. Passages too narrow for most species, too dangerous for conventional forces, and too inaccessible for anyone without the climbing skills of a species that had evolved scaling cliff faces to pursue prey. The humans emerged inside the fortress like ghosts materializing from solid stone. By the time the Thrakari realized what was happening, their command center was in human hands, and their communication arrays were feeding false information to surrounding units. The fortress that had defied 3 armies surrendered in less than an hour, its defenders demoralized by an attack they couldn't understand or counter. This changes everything, breathed Commander Velosh, watching the tactical display update in real time. If they can take Zirian, then no Thrakari position is safe. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Across the northern continent, Thrakari forces began reporting impossible sightings, human infiltrators appearing in secure areas, supply lines being cut by attackers who vanished before they could be engaged, command posts being overrun by forces that shouldn't have been able to reach them. But it wasn't just the tactical success that disturbed me, it was the way the humans fought. There was something almost supernatural about their coordination, as if they shared some form of collective intelligence that allowed them to act as a single organism despite being scattered across hundreds of kilometers. They communicated through methods our sensors couldn't detect, coordinated attacks with precision that defied explanation, and seemed to anticipate enemy movements before the Thrakari themselves knew what they were going to do. Their technology must be more advanced than our intelligence suggested Lieutenant Keksai. Some form of quantum entanglement communication, perhaps, or neural linking technology. I shook my head. It's not technology, it's training, and something else, something in their nature that we don't understand. The afternoon brought the first prisoner exchange, and my first opportunity to observe human operations up close. A Thrakari supply convoy had been captured intact, its guards subdued without casualties and its cargo confiscated. The human squad responsible for the capture agreed to transfer their prisoners to coalition custody, allowing me to accompany the exchange detail. Sergeant Maria Santos removed her helmet as I approached, revealing features that were both alien and disturbingly familiar. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her brown eyes held the same predatory intelligence I had noticed in Colonel Chen. What struck me most, however, was her complete lack of stress despite having just completed what should have been an impossible mission. "Observer Zector," she acknowledged with a nod. "Heard you wanted to see how we work." "Your capture of this convoy," I began carefully. "Our sensors indicate you approached through terrain that should have been impossible to cross. How did you manage it?" She gestured toward the steep mountainside behind us, its surface a maze of loose rock and vertical drops. "Impossible for who? We've been climbing worse than this since we were children. Back home, this would be considered a moderate hiking trail." "But the risk—" "Risk is relative," she interrupted. "What looks like certain death to one species might be Tuesday afternoon to another. Humans didn't become apex predators by avoiding danger. We became apex predators by making danger afraid of us." The captured Thrakari watched our conversation with obvious confusion. Their translator was rendering our words, but I could see they didn't understand what they were hearing. To a species that had evolved natural armor and strength-based tactics, the concept of voluntarily climbing vertical rock faces must have seemed like insanity. "Your people," one of the prisoners clicked in broken galactic standard, "they are not normal. They do things that hurt them, yes, but they do anyway. Why?" Sergeant Santos smiled, and I realized that her expression was identical to the one I had seen on her colonel's face, the smile of a predator who had cornered its prey. "Because pain is temporary, victory is forever." The prisoner's chitinous exoskeleton actually changed color, a Thrakari fear response I had read about but never witnessed. These were warriors from a species that had conquered half a dozen star systems, veterans who had faced the galaxy's most dangerous enemies without flinching. Yet something about the human sergeant's simple statement had shaken them to their core. As we transported the prisoners back to the command station, I found myself in conversation with the human squad. They spoke casually about feats that would be considered suicidal by most species, scaling cliff faces in full gear, moving through cave systems that could collapse at any moment, engaging enemy forces at odds that should have guaranteed their death. But they didn't see these as extraordinary accomplishments. To them, this was simply how problems were solved. "The thing is," explained Corporal Jackson, a stocky human with scars covering his visible skin, "most species fight like they're trying not to lose. Humans fight like we're trying to win. There's a difference." "Explain." "Not losing means you play it safe, follow established doctrine, minimize casualties. Winning means you do whatever it takes to accomplish the mission, even if it seems impossible." He gestured toward the mountains where his teammates were still operating. "The Thrakari built their defenses to stop conventional attacks. They never considered someone crazy enough to climb a vertical cliff face in full battle gear just to get behind their lines." "But the danger is acceptable," finished another human, Specialist Tours. "Look, we've run the calculations. More coalition soldiers will die if this campaign drags on for months than if we end it quickly with aggressive tactics. Sometimes the most dangerous plan is actually the safest in the long run." I was beginning to understand something that had puzzled military analysts for decades. Human forces consistently achieved victories against superior numbers and better-equipped enemies, but not because their technology was superior. They won because they were willing to attempt things that other species considered impossible. Where others saw insurmountable obstacles, humans saw interesting challenges. That evening's briefing revealed the true scope of human achievements. In a single day, they had eliminated 6 major Thrakari strongholds, captured or destroyed 3 supply convoys, and effectively cut the enemy's defensive line in half. Coalition forces that had been stalled for months were suddenly advancing against positions that the humans had softened or eliminated entirely. "How are they sustaining this pace?" asked General Thexam. "Our medical teams report they're operating with minimal sleep, carrying equipment loads that would cripple most species, and pushing through environmental conditions that should be debilitating." Colonel Chen appeared on the communication screen, his image transmitted from somewhere in the northern mountains. Behind him, I could see his soldiers moving with the same purposeful energy they had displayed since their arrival. "General, humans are endurance hunters. We're built for this kind of sustained operation. Our physiology, our psychology, our entire evolutionary heritage is designed for exactly this situation, pursuing a target until it has no choice but to surrender." "But surely your people need rest." "We rest when the job is done," Chen interrupted. "The Thrakari made a mistake when they decided to hold defensive positions. That plays to their strengths but not to ours. Now they're trapped in static positions while we control the tempo of engagement. Every hour that passes, they get weaker while we get stronger." The communication ended, but his words lingered in the command center like a challenge to everything we thought we knew about warfare. I spent that night studying historical records of human conflicts, trying to understand the pattern I was witnessing. What I found was both fascinating and terrifying. Humans didn't fight wars, they won them. Their military history was filled with impossible victories achieved through tactics that other species would never consider. They climbed mountains in winter, crossed deserts that should have killed them, and sailed oceans in vessels that should have sunk. When faced with obstacles that would force other species to retreat or find alternative solutions, humans simply refused to acknowledge that the obstacles existed. "They're insane," Commander Velosh observed when I shared my research. "Magnificently, terrifyingly insane." I had to agree, but as I watched the tactical displays update throughout the night, showing human forces advancing through terrain that should have been impossible to traverse, I realized that their insanity might be exactly what the galaxy needed. The Thrakari had built their entire defensive strategy around the assumption that their enemies would behave rationally. They had never considered the possibility of facing a species that defined rationality differently than everyone else in the galaxy. Tomorrow would bring the true test of human capabilities. The Thrakari were massing their remaining forces for a counterattack that would either crush the human advance or break their hold on Valdris Prime forever. I found myself looking forward to it with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Whatever happened next would redefine how the galaxy understood the nature of warfare itself. The counterattack came at dawn on the 7th day, and it nearly cost me my life. The Thrakari had spent the night massing their remaining forces, 25,000 warriors supported by heavy armor, atmospheric fighters, and orbital bombardment platforms. Intelligence indicated they were abandoning their defensive positions in a desperate gamble to crush the human advance before it could gain momentum. Their plan was sound: concentrate overwhelming force against scattered human units and eliminate them before they could coordinate a response. It should have worked. By every tactical calculation our computers could run, the humans were about to be annihilated. I was observing from forward base echo when the first Thrakari assault wave crested the northern ridgeline. Through my enhanced optics, I could see the enemy formation in terrifying detail. Ranks of chitinous warriors moving with mechanical precision, their natural armor gleaming in the morning sun, their weapons systems already charging for the devastating barrage that would precede their assault. "Estimated time to contact, 4 minutes, reported Lieutenant Keksai from her mobile communications array. "Human forces are scattered across a 15-kilometer front with no apparent defensive positions." General Thexam studied the tactical display with growing alarm. "Where are they? Our sensors show human signatures throughout the target area, but no organized formations, no prepared positions. It's as if they're just scattered randomly through the terrain." The Thrakari bombardment began with earth-shaking fury. Plasma artillery and kinetic bombardment platforms pounded every square meter of ground where human forces had been detected. The mountainside erupted in explosions that should have vaporized any living creature caught in the open. For 12 minutes, the enemy poured fire into the target zone with the systematic precision that had made them feared across 3 star systems. When the barrage ended, the silence was deafening. "Sensors detect no human life signs in the target area," Lieutenant Keksai announced, her voice heavy with what sounded like defeat. "The bombardment appears to have been effective." The Thrakari ground forces advanced in perfect formation, their warriors moving with the confidence of predators approaching a fresh kill. Their aerial reconnaissance showed no movement, no resistance, no sign that anyone had survived their devastating opening salvo. Victory seemed assured. That's when the humans proved that everything we thought we knew about warfare was wrong. The first indication that something unexpected was happening came when Thrakari aerial units began reporting equipment malfunctions, targeting systems failing, navigation computers providing false readings, communications arrays falling silent one by one. What had seemed like random technical failures quickly revealed itself as something far more sinister: systematic electronic warfare being conducted from positions that shouldn't have existed. "How are they jamming our signals?" demanded the Thrakari field commander, his voice crackling through intercepted communications. "Our reconnaissance shows no human forces in the area." The answer came in the form of human soldiers emerging from the landscape itself, not from hidden bunkers or camouflaged positions, but from the very ground that the Thrakari had just finished bombing. They rose from crevices in the rock, from cave systems that our geological surveys had missed, from underground passages that they had spent the previous 2 days carefully mapping and fortifying. The humans hadn't scattered randomly. They had deliberately positioned themselves in locations where they could survive the bombardment and emerge behind enemy lines when the Thrakari advanced. They had used the enemy's own weapons as cover, allowing the plasma barrage to mask their movements into positions that would become tactical advantages once the shooting stopped. "Impossible," breathed Commander Velash. "They deliberately chose to be bombed." What followed was unlike any battle I had ever witnessed. The Thrakari found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to materialize from empty air, strike with devastating precision, and vanish before counterattacks could be coordinated. Human soldiers appeared on ridgelines that should have been swept clean by the bombardment. They emerged from rock formations that seemed solid until human-shaped sections suddenly detached and opened fire. The psychology of it was brilliant and terrifying. The Thrakari had convinced themselves that their enemy was destroyed, only to discover that the humans were not only alive, but had used the bombardment to improve their tactical position. The shock of that realization rippled through the enemy ranks like a physical blow. But the humans weren't content with simple surprise tactics. As the battle developed, they began demonstrating capabilities that challenged everything I understood about biological limitations. They moved through terrain that should have been impassable while carrying equipment loads that should have been debilitating. They coordinated attacks across vast distances with precision that suggested some form of collective intelligence. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to anticipate Thrakari movements before the enemy commanders themselves had decided what to do. "They're reading our tactical patterns," realized General Thexam as he studied the battle displays. "Somehow, they're predicting Thrakari responses and positioning themselves accordingly." I found myself thinking about something Sergeant Santos had said the previous day. "Humans didn't become apex predators by avoiding danger. We became apex predators by making danger afraid of us." Watching the battle unfold, I was beginning to understand what she meant. The humans weren't just fighting the Thrakari. They were hunting them. Every movement, every attack, every tactical decision was designed to drive the enemy toward predetermined positions where human forces waited in ambush. The Thrakari's superior numbers and firepower became irrelevant when they couldn't bring their advantages to bear against an enemy that refused to fight on conventional terms. The turning point came when a Thrakari armored column found itself trapped in Deadman's Canyon, a narrow valley that should have provided perfect cover for their advance. The human forces had somehow predicted exactly where the enemy would move and had spent the previous night preparing a reception that defied belief. Explosive charges buried in the canyon walls brought down tons of rock, sealing both ends of the valley and trapping the armored vehicles in a perfectly constructed kill zone. But instead of simply destroying the trapped forces, the humans did something that sent shock waves through every military observer watching the battle. They offered surrender terms. "Attention Thrakari ground forces," came Colonel Chen's voice over open communications. "You are surrounded and trapped with no possibility of escape. However, you have fought with honor, and we respect your dedication to duty. Lay down your weapons and march out of the canyon with your hands visible. You will be treated according to the Galactic Conventions for prisoners of war." The offer was met with stunned silence. In my 40 cycles of military service, I had never seen a force with overwhelming tactical advantage offer surrender terms to an enemy that could still inflict casualties. Most species would either demand unconditional surrender or simply eliminate the trapped forces to avoid the risk of continued resistance. "Why," whispered Subcommander Krita, "they have the Thrakari helpless. Why give them the opportunity to refuse and force a costly assault?" The answer came in the response from the trapped Thrakari commander. "Human Colonel." His voice carried undertones I had never heard from his species before, something that might have been respect. "Your offer is unexpected. May I ask why you extend mercy to enemies who would not extend the same courtesy to you? Because this isn't about revenge or proving superiority, Chen replied. This is about ending a war with as little loss of life as possible. Your warriors are brave and honorable. They deserve the chance to live to see their families again. The choice is yours. What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary moment in galactic military history. The Thrakari commander, a veteran of dozens of campaigns who had never retreated from any battlefield, formally surrendered his entire force. Not because he was defeated. His unit still possessed enough firepower to make any assault costly, but because the humans had offered him something no enemy had ever provided before: respect for his honor and the lives of his warriors. I have never encountered enemies like you, the Thrakari commander transmitted as his forces laid down their weapons. You fight with the ferocity of ancient gods, but offer mercy like the wisest philosophers. My warriors and I surrender to your protection. The psychological impact of that surrender rippled across the entire battlefield. Other Thrakari units, witnessing their comrades being treated with honor rather than destroyed, began evaluating their own situations differently. The humans' reputation for tactical brilliance was now joined by something equally powerful: a reputation for honor in victory that made surrender a viable option rather than a death sentence. By midday, the counterattack had collapsed entirely, not through the annihilation of enemy forces, but through a combination of tactical superiority and moral example that left the Thrakari unable to continue fighting with their previous intensity. Knowing that defeat meant capture rather than death fundamentally altered the psychological calculus of warfare. I was reviewing preliminary casualty reports when the emergency alarm rang out across forward base Echo. Long-range sensors had detected incoming Thrakari orbital bombardment, targeting coordinates that included our observation post. We had perhaps 2 minutes before high-energy plasma beams turned our position into superheated crater. Evacuation protocols are impossible, reported Lieutenant Keksai, her voice tight with controlled panic. Transport shuttles require minimum 4 minutes to reach safe distance. The base shields won't hold against orbital-class weaponry. That's when human soldiers appeared as if materializing from the ground itself. A squad led by Sergeant Santos emerged from a concealed position I would have sworn was empty, moving with the purposeful urgency of people who had faced this situation before. "Observer Zector," Santos called out, her voice cutting through the chaos of evacuation alarms. "You and your people need to come with us, now." "There's nowhere to run," I protested. "The bombardment will cover this entire area." "Who said anything about running?" She gestured toward what appeared to be solid rock face. "We've prepared alternative accommodations." What she led us to defied both logic and physics. Hidden beneath the base was a cave system that our geological surveys had completely missed, not because the caves didn't exist, but because the humans had spent the past week carefully excavating and reinforcing passages that connected natural underground chambers. In 3 days, they had created a shelter system that could protect dozens of personnel from orbital bombardment. "When did you have time to build this?" demanded General Thexam, as human soldiers guided our entire command staff through tunnels that seemed to stretch for kilometers beneath the mountain. "We didn't build it," Santos replied. "We found it. Humans are very good at reading terrain and understanding what's possible. Your people looked at this mountain and saw solid rock. We looked at it and saw a natural fortress that just needed some minor modifications." The orbital bombardment began as we reached the deepest chambers, the mountain shaking with impacts that would have vaporized anything on the surface. But the cave system held, its natural rock formation and human engineering combining to create a shelter that could withstand firepower designed to crack planetary defenses. As we waited for the bombardment to end, I found myself in conversation with the human soldiers who had saved our lives. They spoke casually about feats that would be considered miraculous by most species: reading geological formations like text, excavating complex tunnel systems in days rather than months, and anticipating enemy tactics with uncanny accuracy. "The thing is," explained Corporal Jackson, the scarred human I had met the previous day, "most species think about problems in terms of what's normal or expected. Humans think about problems in terms of what's possible. There's usually a big difference between those two things." "But the risk," I began, "is manageable if you understand it properly." interrupted Specialist Tors. Look, every military operation involves risk. The question isn't whether something is dangerous, it's whether the danger is acceptable given the potential benefits. Sometimes the most dangerous plan is actually the safest because nobody expects it. When the bombardment finally ended and we emerged from the caves, forward base echo was gone. Vaporized. Nothing remained but superheated glass where our command center had been. If the humans hadn't intervened, everyone in that room would have died. But the base's destruction had revealed something that changed the entire strategic picture. The Thrakari orbital bombardment had been their final desperate gambit, expending their last reserves of heavy firepower in an attempt to eliminate human leadership. With their orbital platforms exhausted and their ground forces demoralized by the day's defeats, they no longer possessed the capability to contest human control of the northern continent. "The war is over," General Thexam announced that evening from our temporary command center in the underground complex. "Thrakari resistance has collapsed. Their remaining forces are requesting terms for general surrender." As night fell over Valdris Prime, I stood in one of the upper caves, looking out over a battlefield that had been transformed in ways I was still struggling to understand. The humans had achieved in 7 days what 3 coalition armies had failed to accomplish in 6 months. They had broken the enemy's will to fight not through superior firepower or overwhelming force, but through a combination of tactical innovation and moral example that redefined what victory meant. "Impressive, isn't it?" Colonel Chen appeared beside me, his pale eyes reflecting the starlight filtering through the cave opening. "How?" I asked, the question that had been building in my mind since their arrival. "How did you know this would work? How did you predict enemy responses with such accuracy? How did you coordinate operations across such vast distances without conventional communications?" He smiled that Predator's smile I had come to recognize. "You're asking the wrong questions, Observer Zector. The question isn't how we did it. The question is why we're the only species that thinks this way." "I don't understand." Most intelligent species evolved as prey animals. They developed technology and social structures to compensate for physical vulnerabilities. But humans evolved as persistence hunters. We don't think about avoiding threats, we think about neutralizing them. We don't plan for what's likely, we prepare for what's possible. He gestured toward the battlefield below. Every other species looks at warfare as a problem to be solved. Humans look at it as a hunt to be won. As I considered his words, I realized that everything I had witnessed over the past week was the result of a fundamental difference in how humans approached challenges. Where other species saw insurmountable obstacles, they saw interesting problems. Where others calculated acceptable losses, they found ways to make the impossible routine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as coalition forces worked to establish a lasting peace on Valdris Prime. But tonight, as I prepared my reports for transmission to military commands across the galaxy, I knew that I was documenting something that would change how warfare was understood throughout known space. The humans hadn't just won a battle, they had demonstrated a new way of thinking about conflict itself. And that demonstration had implications that reached far beyond a single world's liberation. The Thrakari High Command's response to their ground forces' defeat arrived 18 hours after the surrender at Deadman's Canyon, delivered in the form of a transmission that changed everything about our situation on Valdris Prime. "This is War Leader Kethmer of the Thrakari Supremacy Fleet." The voice crackled through our communications array with the authority of absolute command. "The defeats suffered by our ground forces are temporary setbacks. Rather than allow this strategic world to fall into coalition hands, the Supremacy Council has authorized Final Protocol 7. I felt my 4 hearts skip beats as the implications sank in. Commander Velosh's serpentine form went rigid beside me, his scales shifting to the pale color that indicated extreme stress among his species. Even General Thexam, veteran of a dozen campaigns, stepped back from the communications console as if the device itself had become dangerous. "What is Final Protocol 7? Asked Subcommander Krita, though her whispered question carried the tone of someone who already suspected the answer. Lieutenant Kexai consulted her tactical database, her delicate features growing increasingly pale. "Planetary sterilization," she announced quietly. "Rather than allow strategic assets to be captured, the Thrakari will render the entire world uninhabitable. Estimated time frame for complete surface sterilization using their current orbital fleet, 6 standard hours." 17 million coalition civilians, 8,000 human soldiers, 25,000 Thrakari prisoners of war. All would be vaporized when the orbital platforms began their final bombardment sequence. The Thrakari had decided that if they couldn't hold Valdris Prime, nobody would have it. "Can we evacuate?" demanded General Thexam. "Negative. Our transport capacity can handle perhaps 50,000 beings in 6 hours. Even if we began immediate evacuation, we could save less than 3% of the planet's population." The command center fell into stunned silence as the magnitude of our situation became clear. All of our tactical victories, all of the brilliant strategies that had broken Thrakari ground resistance, meant nothing if the enemy was willing to destroy the world rather than accept defeat. That's when Colonel Chen's voice cut through the despair like a blade through darkness. "Observer Zector, I need to speak with you immediately," came his transmission from somewhere in the northern mountains. "And bring any technical specifications you have for Thrakari orbital weapons platforms." I found myself in a transport shuttle 20 minutes later, racing through atmospheric conditions that would normally have grounded all aircraft. The pilot was human, Warrant Officer Park, and she navigated the storm-lashed skis with the same casual competence her species displayed in all their endeavors. When I expressed concern about the weather conditions, she simply smiled. "This isn't weather," she observed, banking through winds that buffeted our shuttle like a leaf in a hurricane. "This is atmospheric concealment, perfect cover for what we're about to attempt." "Which is?" "Something that's either completely impossible or so obvious that nobody else has thought of it," she replied. "With humans, those tend to be the same thing." The shuttle set down in a clearing that hadn't existed the previous day, carved from the mountainside with the efficiency that marked all human operations. What I saw there challenged my understanding of what could be accomplished with limited resources and unlimited determination. The humans had constructed a launch facility. Not a simple rocket pad or missile battery, but a fully functional orbital insertion system capable of delivering personnel and equipment into space. Using salvaged materials from destroyed Thrakari positions, natural resources extracted from the mountain itself, and manufacturing techniques that seemed to blur the line between engineering and artistry, they had built something that should have required months of preparation and millions of tons of specialized equipment. 72 hours, Colonel Chen informed me as he led me through the facility. "That's how long it took to build this. The principles are simple enough: basic reaction mass propulsion with guidance systems borrowed from Thrakari weapon systems. The challenge was doing it fast enough to matter." "You're planning to assault the orbital platforms?" I stared at the makeshift spacecraft being loaded with equipment and personnel. "With these." "Not assault," he corrected. "Infiltrate. The Thrakari orbital fleet consists of 6 heavy bombardment platforms designed to engage targets on planetary surfaces. They're not configured to defend against boarding actions because nobody has ever been crazy enough to launch infantry attacks against orbital fortresses." The plan he outlined was simultaneously brilliant and insane. Human assault teams would use the improvised spacecraft to reach the orbital platforms during the atmospheric chaos that preceded planetary bombardment. The enemy's own weapons systems would provide cover for the approach, their targeting arrays focused downward rather than watching for threats ascending from the planet's surface. "The physics alone should make this impossible," I protested. "Reaching orbital velocity with improvised propulsion systems, navigating through active bombardment fields, boarding heavily armored space platforms with hand weapons." "Should be impossible," Chen agreed. "Which is exactly why it might work. The Thrakari have spent millennia developing defensive doctrines against conventional threats. They've never considered the possibility of facing enemies who specialize in doing the impossible." As I watched human soldiers preparing for what amounted to a suicide mission, I began to understand something fundamental about their species. They didn't calculate odds, they created them. Where other beings might see overwhelming disadvantages, humans saw tactical opportunities that hadn't been explored yet. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Military observers don't usually receive advance briefings on covert operations." Chen's pale eyes met mine with disturbing intensity. "Because if this fails, someone needs to survive to explain to the galaxy what happened here. And if it succeeds, Someone needs to document how humans approach problems that other species consider unsolvable. First launch came at sunset, timed to coincide with the orbital platform's initial bombardment preparation. I watched through enhanced optics as the improvised spacecraft accelerated through atmosphere that was already beginning to glow from orbital weapon charging sequences. The vehicle looked crude compared to standard coalition shuttles, but its trajectory was perfect. A ballistic arc that would intercept the nearest bombardment platform just as its crew prepared for planetary sterilization. "How are they navigating?" asked General Thexam, who had arrived to observe the operation despite the obvious dangers. "Our computers show multiple gravitational anomalies and electromagnetic interference that should make precise targeting impossible." "They're not using computers," replied Warrant Officer Park, monitoring communications from the ground-based control center. "They're flying by instinct and manual calculation. Human pilots don't need perfect information. They need sufficient information and the skill to adapt when conditions change." What followed was unlike anything in recorded military history. Human assault teams reached and boarded 3 orbital platforms simultaneously, engaging Thrakari defenders in close-quarters combat within environments that were never designed for infantry operations. The battle reports that filtered back painted a picture of warfare that defied both physics and common sense. Human soldiers fighting in zero-gravity environments wearing improvised pressure suits. Boarding actions conducted through breached airlocks, while orbital platforms continued their bombardment preparations. Hand-to-hand combat in the engineering sections of starships, with humans somehow adapting faster to the alien environment than the Thrakari crew members who had trained in it for cycles. "Platform 7 is offline," reported Lieutenant Keksai, monitoring the orbital situation from our underground command center. "Platform 4 is showing multiple system failures. Platform 1 appears to be under human control." But the true breakthrough came when the humans demonstrated something that shocked even me. Instead of simply sabotaging the orbital weapons, they turned them against each other. Platform by platform, the Thrakari bombardment fleet began engaging its own units as human boarding parties seized control of weapons systems and redirected their targeting protocols. "Impossible," breathed Commander Velosh. "They're using the enemy's own weapons against them." "Not just using them," I observed, studying the tactical displays. "They're using them better than the Thrakari ever did. Look at those targeting solutions, precision strikes that disable rather than destroy, coordinated attacks that isolate individual platforms before they can respond effectively." The orbital battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the entire Thrakari bombardment fleet was either destroyed, captured, or fleeing the system. The threat of planetary sterilization had been eliminated not through superior firepower or better technology, but through human willingness to attempt something that no sane military planner would ever consider. But the victory came at a cost that put human nature into sharp perspective. 14 of the assault shuttles had been lost, along with the specialized crews that had made the mission possible. In any other military organization, such losses would be considered catastrophic. The humans treated them as acceptable casualties in an operation that had saved 17 million civilian lives. "How do you justify such sacrifices?" I asked Colonel Chen when he returned to the planet's surface aboard a captured Thrakari shuttle. "We don't justify them," he replied quietly. "We honor them. Those people knew the odds when they volunteered for the mission. They also knew what would happen to millions of innocent beings if we failed. When the choice is between certain death for everyone and possible death for some, humans choose possible death, every time." The aftermath of the orbital battle revealed something about human military doctrine that I was only beginning to understand. While other species might have celebrated the destruction of enemy forces, the humans immediately began organizing humanitarian aid for captured Thrakari personnel. The same soldiers who had fought with ruthless efficiency in zero gravity were now providing medical assistance to their former enemies. "This is what I don't understand about your species," I admitted to Sergeant Santos as she coordinated prisoner transfer operations. "You fight like demons when battle is necessary, but show mercy that borders on weakness when victory is achieved." "It's not mercy," she corrected. "It's humanity. The Thrakari aren't our enemies because we hate them. They're our enemies because they threatened innocent people. Once that threat is removed, they're just fellow beings who need help." The final engagement of the Valdris Prime campaign came not from enemy action, but from an unexpected source. The orbital battle had attracted the attention of a different threat: Void Hunters, the robotic remnants of an ancient war that occasionally emerged from deep space to consume inhabited worlds. Long-range sensors detected a hunting pack approaching the system, drawn by the electromagnetic signatures of orbital combat. Most military commanders would have immediately withdrawn their forces, leaving Valdris Prime to its fate. Void Hunters were considered unstoppable once they reached a populated world, mechanical nightmares that consumed everything organic and left only sterile metal in their wake. The humans, predictably, saw the situation differently. "How many?" was Colonel Chen's first question when informed of the approaching threat. 1,200 killers and what appears to be a Harvester-class command unit, reported Lieutenant Keksai. Estimated arrival time, 6 hours. Evacuation is still impossible, added General Thexam. Transport capacity remains insufficient for planetary-scale operations. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Then we make a stand. Against Void Hunters. Colonel, with respect, your forces have achieved miracles, but this is beyond even human capabilities. That Predator's smile returned. General, we've captured an entire orbital weapons platform and have several thousand very motivated Thrakari prisoners who know this system better than we do. Void Hunters might be individually superior to any organic forces, but they have one critical weakness. Which is? They're predictable. They've been using the same tactical algorithms for thousands of years. They expect resistance to follow conventional patterns. Chen gestured toward the captured orbital platform, its weapons now pointed toward deep space. Time to show them what happens when humans decide the rules need changing. As night fell over Valdris Prime, I found myself observing preparations for a battle that would determine whether an entire world lived or died. Human forces worked alongside their former Thrakari enemies, both species united by the common threat approaching from the void between stars. What I witnessed that night would forever change my understanding of what made humans truly exceptional. It wasn't their individual courage or tactical brilliance, though both were impressive. It wasn't their willingness to attempt the impossible, though that trait had proven decisive multiple times. It was their ability to inspire other beings to transcend their own limitations. Thrakari warriors who had fought humans with desperate fury now worked beside them with equal determination. Coalition forces that had been demoralized by months of failure suddenly displayed initiative and creativity that matched human standards. Even the mechanical precision of Void Hunter tactics couldn't account for an enemy that constantly evolved its approach based on inspiration rather than calculation. The battle for Valdris Prime was about to reach its climax, and I suspected that everything I thought I knew about warfare was about to change once again. The Void Hunters arrived at Valdris Prime like harbingers of mechanical death, their dark forms sliding through space with the inexorable precision that had made them the galaxy's most feared nightmare for millennia. Watching them approach through long-range sensors, I understood why entire star systems evacuated rather than face these remnants of an ancient war between machine intelligence and organic life. 1,200 killer units, each one a kilometer of predatory metal designed for a single purpose: the complete elimination of biological life. Behind them came something worse, a Harvester-class command unit that would coordinate their assault and process whatever remained when the killing was done. Together, they represented enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. Estimated time to orbital insertion, 47 minutes, reported Lieutenant Keksai from her position aboard the captured Thrakari command platform. Hunter-killer formations are maintaining standard approach vectors, no deviation from historical patterns. I found myself in the unusual position of commanding the orbital defense, since the ranking human officers were coordinating ground-based operations. Through the viewports of the alien vessel, I could see the approaching mechanical fleet with terrifying clarity. Each hunter-killer bristled with weapons systems designed over thousands of years of warfare: energy cannons that could crack continental plates, molecular disintegrators that reduced organic matter to component atoms, and self-repair systems that made them nearly indestructible. "Observer Zector," came Colonel Chen's voice through the communication system, transmitted from the planet's surface. "Status report. The Void Hunters are following predicted approach patterns. I replied, studying the tactical displays. But I must ask again, are you certain this plan will work? We're facing enemies that have destroyed civilizations far more advanced than anything on Valdris Prime. That's exactly why it will work, he responded with the calm confidence I had come to associate with human tactical thinking. The Void Hunters have been so successful for so long that they've become predictable. They expect organic forces to behave logically, to retreat when facing superior firepower, to defend population centers, to follow conventional military doctrine. They've never faced an enemy that considers conventional wisdom to be a starting point rather than a limitation. What followed was perhaps the most audacious military operation I have ever witnessed. Instead of preparing static defenses or attempting to evacuate the planet's population, the humans had convinced every available force, coalition, Thrakari, and even civilian volunteers, to participate in a plan that defied every principle of sound military strategy. They were going to hunt the Hunters. The first phase began when the Void Hunters entered the outer system. Rather than engaging them immediately, human forces activated a series of false sensor readings that made Valdris Prime appear to be defended by conventional orbital platforms and surface-based missile batteries. The mechanical invaders, following algorithmic responses refined over millennia, moved to eliminate these apparent threats using standard tactical protocols. What they found instead were decoys, sophisticated sensor phantoms created using captured Thrakari stealth technology and human improvisational genius. While the Void Hunters wasted precious minutes destroying targets that didn't exist, the real defenses moved into position using attack vectors that no sane military commander would ever consider. Phase 1 complete, reported Warrant Officer Park from her improvised command center. Enemy forces have committed to assault formations based on false intelligence, beginning Phase 2. The second phase was where human tactical doctrine revealed its true nature. Instead of meeting the Void Hunters in direct confrontation, human forces had positioned themselves throughout the asteroid field that orbited Valdris Prime's outer moon. Using a combination of captured Thrakari equipment and modifications that seemed to blur the line between engineering and artistry, they had turned chunks of space debris into mobile weapons platforms. The Void Hunters, expecting to face stationary defenses, suddenly found themselves under attack from enemies that shouldn't have been able to move, coordinate, or even exist in the hostile environment of space. Asteroids that had appeared inert on their sensors began accelerating toward hunter-killer units, revealing themselves as camouflaged assault craft operated by human crews wearing improvised spacesuits. "Impossible," I murmured, watching the tactical display update in real time. "They're conducting boarding operations against Void Hunters using asteroids as assault vehicles." "Not just boarding operations," observed Commander Velosh, who had joined me aboard the command platform. "They're coordinating simultaneous attacks across multiple targets using manual piloting and visual coordination. How are they maintaining formation coherence without quantum communications?" The answer became clear as I watched human pilots navigate the chaos of space combat with skills that seemed to transcend normal biological limitations. They weren't relying on technology to coordinate their attacks. They were reading each other's intentions through subtle variations in flight patterns, communicating through maneuvers that carried meaning only to beings who had trained together, until they could anticipate each other's responses. It was pack hunting, adapted to three-dimensional space warfare. The first hunter-killer fell when human assault teams managed to breach its primary processing center, introducing computer viruses crafted from captured Void Hunter code and powered by human creativity. The massive mechanical predator, designed to be invulnerable to conventional weapons, found itself fighting an internal war as its own systems turned against each other. "How did they develop counter-intrusion software so quickly?" demanded General Thexam from the Surface Command Center. "Void Hunter security protocols have never been breached by organic intelligence." "Because they didn't try to match Void Hunter programming techniques," explained Sergeant Santos, who had somehow managed to infiltrate the hunter-killer's core systems despite the impossibility of organic life surviving in that environment. "They used Void Hunter logic against itself. These machines are designed to process and respond to organic behavior patterns, but they can't adapt when those patterns change faster than their algorithms can update." The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Human forces, supported by their unlikely allies among the former Thrakari garrison, engaged void hunters in combat that ranged from the depths of space to the surface of Valdris Prime's moons. What should have been a one-sided massacre became a running battle that tested the limits of both machine precision and organic adaptability. But the true revelation came when the Harvester-class command unit entered the engagement zone. This was the nightmare that had haunted organic civilization for millennia, a mobile factory of death capable of processing entire worlds into raw materials for more void hunters. Its arrival should have ended all resistance within minutes. Instead, it found itself facing something that challenged its fundamental programming, organic forces that fought like machines but adapted like living creatures. Human assault teams penetrated the Harvester's defensive perimeter using tactics that were simultaneously suicidal and brilliant. They rode disabled hunter-killer units like improvised spacecraft, using the mechanical corpses as both transportation and camouflage. They hijacked the Harvester's own construction systems, turning assembly lines designed to create death machines into weapons against their creators. Most remarkably, they convinced their Thrakari allies to participate in boarding operations that required them to trust human leadership completely. Watching proud Thrakari warriors follow human commands into situations that defied their every instinct for self-preservation, I realized I was witnessing something that transcended normal military cooperation. I was watching one species teach another to transcend its own limitations. The final assault on the Harvester's command corps was led by Colonel Chen himself, accompanied by war leader Kethmer, the same Thrakari commander who had authorized planetary sterilization hours earlier. Together, human and Thrakari forces fought through mechanical defenses that should have been impregnable, their combined tactics proving more effective than either species could have achieved alone. "The central processor is heavily shielded," reported Chen, as his assault team penetrated deeper into the Harvester's core systems. "We're going to need something that can breach quantum-hardened defense matrices." "Human Colonel," came Kethmer's response, his voice carrying tones I had never heard from Thrakari vocal cords before. "My species has developed such weapons, but deployment requires someone to remain behind to ensure proper detonation." The silence that followed carried implications that every being monitoring the communications understood. What the Thrakari commander was proposing was a suicide mission, sacrificing himself to ensure that the Void Hunter command unit would be destroyed. Chen's response revealed something about human nature that I am still struggling to understand. "Negative, war leader. We came here to save lives, not waste them. There's always another way." What followed was 12 minutes of tactical improvisation that redefined what was possible when two intelligent species worked together toward a common goal. Using Thrakari weapons technology and human tactical creativity, the assault team managed to breach the Harvester's core defenses without requiring anyone to make the ultimate sacrifice. The destruction of the command unit sent cascading failures throughout the remaining Void Hunter fleet. Deprived of central coordination, the individual hunter-killers reverted to basic survival protocols that made them vulnerable to the coordinated attacks that human forces had been perfecting throughout the engagement. When the last mechanical predator was destroyed, the silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Across the Valdris system, organic beings who had expected to die were suddenly faced with the impossible reality of survival. "Status report," requested General Thexam, his voice carrying tones of disbelief. "All Void Hunter units eliminated," reported Lieutenant Kexai. "No remaining mechanical threats detected in the system. Casualties are surprisingly minimal given the scope of the engagement." As I compiled my final reports on the Valdris Prime campaign, I found myself struggling to quantify what I had witnessed. The humans had achieved victories that redefined what was possible in modern warfare. They had defeated enemies that were considered unstoppable by conventional military analysis. They had turned certain defeat into overwhelming victory through tactics that most species would never consider. But the true measure of human achievement wasn't their tactical brilliance or their willingness to attempt the impossible. It was their ability to inspire other beings to transcend their own limitations. The Thrakari forces that had participated in the final battles fought with a courage and creativity that their own commanders would have considered impossible days earlier. You've changed how we think about warfare itself, I admitted to Colonel Chen during the victory celebration that followed. The techniques you've demonstrated here will be studied in military academies across the galaxy. That's not the point, he replied, his pale eyes reflecting the satisfaction of a job well done. The point is that organic intelligence can adapt faster than mechanical programming, biological creativity can outmaneuver algorithmic responses, and cooperation between species can achieve things that no single civilization could accomplish alone. But why? What drives humans to attempt things that other species consider impossible? He considered the question carefully before answering. Because impossible is just another word for something that hasn't been done yet. Every major advance in galactic civilization came from someone who decided that the impossible was merely difficult. That evening, as coalition forces began the long process of establishing permanent peace on Valdris Prime, I transmitted my final observation report to Cathurian Command. The document would be classified at the highest levels, distributed only to military commanders who needed to understand what humanity represented in the broader context of galactic security. The summary was simple but profound. Humanity was not just another spacefaring species seeking their place among the stars. They were evolutionary game changers who would either revolutionize how the galaxy approached conflict or force every other civilization to evolve beyond recognition. Watching human soldiers work alongside their former Thrakari enemies to rebuild what the war had destroyed, I finally understood why the galaxy feared them. It wasn't because they were powerful. Other species possessed equivalent or superior military capabilities. It wasn't because they were aggressive. The universe had known countless warlike civilizations. The galaxy feared humans because they were agents of change in a cosmos that preferred stability. They looked at established systems and saw opportunities for improvement. They encountered impossible situations and invented new solutions. They faced enemies that couldn't be defeated and found ways to turn them into allies. They represented evolution itself, the relentless drive to adapt, overcome, and transcend whatever limitations the universe imposed. Standing on the observation deck of the captured Thrakari command ship, watching human and alien personnel work together with an efficiency that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier, I realized that I had been privileged to witness something that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what was possible. I had watched humans step onto the battlefield and finally understood why the galaxy fears them. Not because they were conquerors or destroyers, but because they were teachers, beings who showed other species that the impossible was simply another word for something that required creative thinking to achieve. The war for Valdris Prime was over, but the revolution in galactic military thinking that the humans had sparked was just beginning. And perhaps, I thought as I prepared to return to Cathurian space with my impossible reports, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Someone to remind us all that evolution never stops, adaptation never ends, and the impossible is always temporary for species willing to think beyond conventional limitations. The humans had taught us all something valuable. In a universe full of ancient civilizations convinced that they had seen everything possible, there was still room for miracles. They just required the right kind of madness to achieve them.